looking forward to it.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you all hear me okay, even at the back? Wonderful. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. James Herrera Brooks, and I'm the Melanie Trent de Schutter Library Director here at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. That's always a mouthful to get out. I'm extremely delighted to welcome you to this noontime lecture in our Scholar Series. And before we start with these, we always like to acknowledge the generous support of Comrade Mercer Hall, who has endowed this lecture series for the VMHC. Comrade serves as an honorary vice chair of the Board of Trustees of this institution and has been a champion of our work for decades. We also wish to acknowledge former VMHC President and CEO, Dr. Charles Bryan, whom this series also honors. Before we start with today's program, I just want to take some time to run through some upcoming events here at the VMHC. So first of all, coming up next weekend, the VMHC, along with the VMFA, will play host to the Pocahontas Film Festival. This is a rich and varied annual festival that honors the contributions of Indigenous filmmakers to American film and also reinvigorates conversations about the stories that we tell about Indigenous life. So I'd encourage you all to get there if you can. It's going to be a 3-day event next weekend. And then on December 5th, we're going to have a special evening lecture when we'll welcome Dr. Patrick Spiro, who is the librarian and director of the American Philosophical Society, for a talk on his latest book, The Scientist Turned Spy, Andre Michaud, Thomas Jefferson, and the Conspiracy of 1793. So that'll be an evening lecture on December 5th. And then we'll return to our regular Scholar Series here in the Robbins Forum on December 12th at noon. We'll be welcoming Frank Garman, a historian of the Civil War era, for a talk on his latest book, A Wonderful Career in Crime, Charles Cowlam's Masquerades in Civil War Era and Gilded Age Virginia. So on to today's program, and just before I introduce today's speaker and the topic, I'd just like to remind you to please make sure any devices that can ring or buzz or make any sound or disturbance whatsoever are either set to do not disturb, silence, or are simply switched off. And with that done, I'll make a start. Our nation's first elected Black governor, L. Douglas Wilder, returned to public service in 2005 as the mayor of Richmond. Despite his landslide election, voters had little idea what they were getting themselves into. Many were ill-prepared for Wilder's strong style of leadership, and while he had remarkable success in reducing crime, cutting government spending, and boosting economic vitality, his relationship with the city council and the school board tarnished his record as mayor. Today's lecture will recount the turmoil of Richmond's transition to the strong mayor model of local government during what was a memorable chapter in Richmond's rich political history. And here today to tell us this story is a Richmond native with a master's degree in journalism from VCU, Linwood Norman. Linwood served as the city's director of communications during Wilder's strong mayor tenure, and Norman's career has spanned the public, the corporate, and nonprofit sectors, and includes posts as senior communications advisors for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, communications manager for Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, and communications director for Zero, the end of prostate cancer. Earlier in his career, Norman was a reporter for the Newport News Daily Press and the Petersburg Progress Index, where he received a Virginia Press Association First Place Award for investigative journalism, and he also served as a contributing writer for Richmond Magazine and Virginia Town and City Magazine. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Linwood Norman.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming out on a dreary day, but I think that you will find some enjoyment with my presentation because it involves someone who is a very fascinating person, Douglas Wilder. So what we're going to talk about today is when Mayor Doug Wilder ruled Richmond. This is a picture of the mayor on the day of his swearing in at the Greater Richmond Convention Center in 2005. He was almost 74 years old at the time. And as I recall, he never missed a day of work due to illness in the 4 years that he was in office. To start off my presentation today, I think that when you're describing an individual and his subsequent actions as an adult, it's useful to begin by looking at that individual in their childhood years. It gives you a more complete understanding about the characteristics and behavior that the person will carry with them into adulthood. So let's get started. Lawrence Douglas Wilder was born on January 17th, 1931. You can do the math, but I'll do it for you. Wilder is 93 years old, and he still remains quite active. He was the seventh of 8 kids. He had a brother who was 10 years older, and he had 6 sisters. The family lived in a house at 28th and P Street in the segregated Churchill neighborhood of Richmond. The house was torn down many years ago. He was always called Douglas in the home, never just plain Doug. Here's how a childhood friend described Douglas Wilder at the school they attended together. Quote, "He was always gifted with the ability to speak. He had a golden tongue. He was the one who was always chastised for talking out of turn in class. Or if there was any mischief underway, he always seemed to be a part of it," unquote. Even though he could not sit still, Wilder described himself as precocious at an early age. He was a straight-A student when he attended the all-black George Mason Elementary School and later at Armstrong High School. He admits that his parents would have put him on the medication called Ritalin to calm him down as a child. The following statement is taken from his autobiography titled Son of Virginia. Here's how he described himself. Quote, "I was a ball of fire. If they'd had Ritalin back in the 1940s, I no doubt would have been diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I was a very good student, always making A's and always getting an equal number of demerits for either being late or furnishing the answers to questions being asked of other students. My teachers eventually had to discourage me from raising my hand in class because I couldn't stop myself from dominating the discussions," unquote. Douglas adored his older brother, Bob, who's shown in the photo on the left, because Bob always took him under his wing in their neighborhood. At their Churchill home, the family raised chickens, guineas, ducks, homing pigeons, and in the picture on the right, Douglas is shown with what looks like a litter of little baby pigs. Many of you may already be aware that Wilder served in the Army during the Korean War. He earned the Bronze Star for valor on the battlefield, and he later climbed to the rank of sergeant. Lesser known to most people is that Wilder loved to sing, and he had the voice for it. According to the Washington Post reporter, Don Baker, who also wrote a book about Wilder, Baker says Wilder made a name for himself as a singer, first as a child singing in church socials, and then he continued his love of singing by performing in bars as a young man with his deep baritone voice. In the photo on the right, he is singing while he was in the Army, stationed at Camp Breckinridge in Kentucky. After his military service, Wilder used the GI Bill to go to Howard University to get his law degree. Getting a law degree was not possible in Virginia at that time due to segregation. So he went to Howard University in Washington, D.C. He later established his law practice in 1959 and entered politics 10 years later in 1969, where he won a state Senate seat in a three-man race. During his political career, he won every election in which he was a candidate. He broke the racial barrier and set a number of milestones along the way. Wilder became the first person of color elected to the Virginia General Assembly since Reconstruction, and he was widely recognized as one of the most influential state senators. He served in that position for 16 years. Okay, here we go. This photo comes from a book that Don Baker wrote about Wilder, in which he describes Wilder as the dude. Wilder became known for being a stylish dresser who drove around in convertible cars and enjoyed the finer things in life that come from being a successful lawyer. You'll also notice the hairstyle, a fro, which was popular at the time. I did some research because I was curious who was in the painting on the wall, and I found out that it was Governor Harry Byrd Sr., who of course ran the Byrd machine and the massive resistance movement by closing the public schools rather than segregating them. I wouldn't be at all surprised to learn that this photo may have been staged in order to show the irony of Wilder, a person of color and a state senator, smiling as Governor Byrd was looking in the background over his shoulder. As lieutenant governor, Wilder was the first Black to hold state office in Virginia. Here he is shown presiding over the state Senate. Next would come the major event that would firmly place Doug Wilder in the history books. L. Douglas Wilder was the first elected Black governor in the United States. Here he is shown at the swearing in at the state capitol with Lieutenant Governor Don Beyer and Attorney General Mary Sue Terry. He won the governor's race by the slimmest of margins. He won by less than 0.5%, which was about 6,500 votes out of 1.7 million votes that were cast. It was years later, after leaving the governor's mansion, that Wilder focused on the operation of the city of Richmond. He thought the mayor of Richmond should be elected by the people instead of being chosen by fellow council members. He thought a popularly elected mayor would lend greater accountability and transparency in government. So in 2003, a citywide referendum was held, and the voters overwhelmingly approved the idea of electing their governor. Then the election was held the following year in 2004, and Wilder made the surprise announcement that he had decided he would run for mayor himself. He won by a nearly 80% landslide and carried all of the city's 9 council districts. So only 10 years after leaving the governor's mansion, he was back in the political spotlight, taking charge. It was a stirring year, to say the least, as shown in the newspaper headline on the right, which also noted that Wilder had shaken up Richmond. On the campaign trail, Wilder promised to eliminate inefficiency in government, and as one columnist put it, Wilder carved up the city's sacred cows into hamburger meat. This is an editorial cartoon by Gary Brookins, whose work was published in the Richmond Times-Dispatch. As you can see, the wrecking ball is ready to strike the city of Richmond bureaucracy. Here's how Style Weekly described Wilder's first year in office as the mayor. For the last 12 months, Richmond's first popularly elected mayor in half a century hasn't only shaken things up, he's jackhammered the foundation, unquote. Style Weekly also named him Richmonder of the Year in 2005 and said that he was perhaps more powerful as mayor than when he was governor. As Richmond's first strong mayor, Wilder received additional powers that strengthened his position and produced fundamental changes in how the city would be operated. Many of these changes did not sit well with city council because it reduced the amount of power they used to have. Wilder assumed many of the responsibilities and duties that under the old form of Richmond government had belonged to the city manager. Wilder was also able to run circles around the city council because one only needs to consider the stature of the incoming mayor and his breadth of experience. Wilder had a total of 24 years experience when you add up his time as governor, lieutenant governor, and state senator. He had extensive firsthand experience in state government and a vast network of individuals to whom he could turn when he needed to. In 2005, the city of Richmond became the first city to have what is called the strong mayor form of government. The change was described by some observers as Richmond's political experiment in progress. To this day, going on nearly 20 years now, Richmond remains the only city in Virginia to have a strong mayor form of government. Shown here is Wilder being welcomed at a city council meeting during his first year in office. Wilder had what some consider to be a rock star personality that could light up a council meeting. Here's how Richmond Magazine summed it up. Quote, when most people walk into a city council meeting, reporters glance at them and look away. When Doug Wilder makes one of his periodic strolls through council chambers, the place murmurs to life. Doug's here. When Wilder's around, council is forgotten. Though Wilder could light up a council meeting, however, his appearances were not always, shall we say, pretty. Here's an example. This Richmond Times-Dispatch article described one council meeting in which an unprecedented 40-minute argument ensued between the mayor and the city council. This was during his second year in office. So it's safe to say that an unsteady relationship existed between the mayor and the city council, and the school board too, for that matter. One of Wilder's major initiatives was known as the City of the Future program, and it focused largely on public education. The City of the Future program was a sweeping $300 million 5-year plan that would build or modernize 15 city schools without any increase in taxes. Here in the photo on the left, Wilder is giving his first State of the City address in 2006. In addition to building regular schools, he wanted to create specialty schools that would represent a new path for local education. He wanted to establish a new high school for the arts, and he wanted to establish a new high school for math and science. Both would be operated as charter schools, which means they would operate independently from the city school system, which the mayor felt was too bureaucratic and top-heavy. Some would consider it ironic, however, that during his term, no new schools were built during the time that he was mayor. Here is a photo on the right that shows what goes on behind the scenes in a typical day at City Hall. This is a photo of Wilder in his office with Harry Black, who is the city's finance director, and me. As you can see, a lot of paperwork crossed the mayor's desk. So I would like to shift gears now. In my presentation today, I would like to show some distinct situations and at times unexpected or perhaps less remembered circumstances and how Mayor Wilder handled those issues. So let's begin with this situation. This is what the tennis and basketball courts at Battery Park looked like in September of 2006. The situation in Battery Park was caused by excessive rains and flooding due to a collapsed sewer line. As the water level rose in the park, the mayor ordered an emergency evacuation of more than 400 households that were moved out of their homes in a 2-hour period. Heavy rains came back again about 5 weeks later that necessitated a second evacuation. And there were about a dozen homes that were beyond repair and had to be torn down. This situation exemplifies how Wilder dealt with a crisis. He mobilized extensive measures to help the people who were impacted by the flooding. How did he do it? The answer is he brought the services of Richmond City Hall to them. A mini City Hall was set up in an elementary school where city employees were on hand from the departments of community development, public utilities, public works, health, social services, and parks and recreation, so that the people did not have to travel downtown to City Hall for assistance. Instead, Wilder brought the city services to them. Now let's focus on downtown redevelopment. Miller and Rhodes, which offered a grand shopping experience in downtown Richmond in its heyday, went bankrupt and closed in 1990. And though there were plans to renovate the building into becoming a hotel, nothing was happening by the time Wilder entered office in 2005. The building had been closed for 15 years by that time. 15 years. Wilder took action and resuscitated the project by bringing in an additional developer so that adequate financing would be available for the project to begin. In the photo on the left, Wilder is among the speakers announcing the start of construction in 2006. The photo on the right is a rendering of what the finished project would look like. It became a Hilton hotel and a condominium complex that opened in 2009. This is an example of where the mayor stepped in to fix a problem that had continued for several years. Another distinct situation facing Mayor Wilder was his determination to clean up neighborhoods that had litter, tall grass, and dilapidated buildings. The mayor had frequently noted that it's well known that crime and blight go hand in hand. The city strengthened its housing code enforcement efforts by having what is called a vacant building registry that tracked the condition of 3,400 unoccupied buildings across the city. Housing code inspections increased from 26,000 in 2006 to more than 47,000 in 2008. Buildings that were vacant for 12 months or longer had to be boarded up and secured, or repaired and made suitable for occupancy. City housing inspectors also could issue a summons on the spot for violations, and that helped expedite the cases going to court. The benefits of code enforcement were especially apparent in cleaning up sections of Broad Street in downtown, such as at 2nd and Broad, which is a gateway into the historic Jackson Ward neighborhood. By the time Mayor Wilder entered office in 2005, plans were already underway to modernize the Carpenter Center on East Gray Street, not too far from City Hall. The original performing arts plan also included building a new symphony hall. Wilder took issue with the fundraising efforts for the project and whether the general public actually supported it. He wanted to make sure that the city did not overextend itself with an extremely heavy financial commitment. In March of 2005, his third month in office, Wilder offered this assessment of the situation. Here's what he told a newspaper reporter at the time, quote, "I'm like the old elephant going across a bridge. I put one foot on it and shake it to see if it'll take a second foot. I don't want to commit the city financially until I see a way to get across, unquote. Over time, the Carpenter Center was restored and a symphony hall was never built. This is an instance where Wilder stood his ground as the strong mayor and challenged a project that had been unanimously endorsed by the city council. I won't go into any additional detail about this situation because an entire chapter is devoted to the Performing Arts Center in the book. Wilder was a strong believer in preserving the open waterfront along the James River. You'll see that the photo on the left is the view of the James River when you're standing at the overlook at Libby Hill Park in Church Hill. This view had a striking geographic similarity to a town just outside London, England, called Richmond upon Thames, as in the Thames River. The phrase, "the view that named Richmond," was coined by William Byrd in 1737, and that's how Richmond got its name. In 2006, the owner of one of the private properties along the open waterfront had proposed building a high-rise condominium complex that would not only restrict public access to the river, it would also block the historic view of the James River as seen from Libby Hill Park. As you can imagine, the historic preservationists were soon up in arms. Wilder did not favor the condo project, and it ultimately fell apart. The high-rise condominiums were never built, and the land eventually became part of the James River Park system. What is important to remember, however, is that Wilder's actions were highly instrumental in preserving the view that named Richmond. In addition to preserving the open waterfront along the James River, Wilder wanted to build a marina in the city's East End. However, City Council did not go along with the mayor's proposal for a marina. This was at the time that the waterfront development known as Rocket's Landing, which is located at the city's border with Henrico County, was already planning to build its own marina, as shown in the rendering on the left. Wilder wanted the city to build a smaller marina and enter into a joint venture with Rocket's Landing so that recreational activities such as tall ship festivals could be held, such as you see with the schooner Virginia photo on the right. However, again, the city council did not agree and the proposal went nowhere. Today, with all of the interest shown to maximize the beauty and recreational possibilities of the James River for everyone to enjoy, some people might say Wilder was ahead of his time on this issue. Wilder was keenly interested in the operation of the Richmond public school system. He believed that education was the key, and he was greatly concerned that the school system was spending $71 million more than the statewide average to operate. The Richmond public schools also showed very poor academic results, such as having graduation rates that were among the lowest in the state. Among other things, Wilder revamped the city school system's truancy program. Under his truancy plan, parents were contacted after a child's 3 unexcused absences, instead of the school system's policy of waiting until 10 absences. He demanded a comprehensive audit to show where money was being spent. He criticized the school system's poor maintenance of its buildings. And he repeatedly asked the school board to leave City Hall and move to a new location. The mayor expressed his concerns in a video that I'm about to show you that is taken from one of his issues of his online newsletter called Visions. Wilder starts off in the video by talking about the amount of money that could be saved if the school system had followed the recommendations of the city auditor.
To consider the $20 million that could have been saved last year, the 6.7 that they say now could be saved, and this is still partial. When you add them all up, I understand the amounts come to about 50-some plus $million. The thing that bothers you is, though, you hear all these people talking about they need more money. To do what? When you look at the abysmal graduation rate of our kids, the lowest in our area, the lowest in one of the lowest in the state. When you look at all those core cities like Portsmouth and Norfolk in the 80 percentiles, when you see the statewide average at 79%, and where is Richmond? 47% of our kids graduate from school. Now, I'm going to tell you, I've been preaching to this group for the last 2 to 3 years. I've been saying that there must be change. I came in on the ushering of change and the culture of cesspool of inefficiency, ineffectiveness. It is as residing in the school system as any other place. So there has to be change in the school system from the top. You've got to have new people on the school board, and you have to have new people running our school system. In the absence of that, nothing is going to change.
So as you can see, the mayor had strong opinions about the school system, very strong opinions. Take a look at this headline that was carried in the Richmond Times-Dispatch in December of 2008 at the end of Mayor Wilder's term. He was called the master of the big surprise because, among other things, he ran for political offices that he was warned he could never win. And yet we know he proved them wrong. To that, I would like to add what he did regarding the Richmond school system. As you may recall, the school board did not want to leave its offices at City Hall, even though the mayor had been requesting for more than 2 years that they leave. So once again, it was time for the big surprise. Here is what happened on the night of September 21st, 2007. This was 17 years ago. By around 7 o'clock that night, a Friday night, the moving trucks began lining up around City Hall, ready to dismantle and pack up the school board offices, which would be moved out of City Hall. Before the attempted eviction, the City Council had approved an ordinance that allowed the school board to continue to rent office space and remain at City Hall. So ultimately, it became a question of who had the authority to decide whether the school board could remain at City Hall. Was it the City Council, or was it the strong mayor? A circuit court judge had already ruled against the mayor, so he planned to appeal the matter to the Virginia Supreme Court. A few months after the failed eviction, an editorial in the Times-Dispatch offered this assessment of the situation. Quote, "Just how much authority remains to be sorted out. There are different ways to go about that. Wilder prefers the World Wrestling Entertainment approach with bright lights and braggadocio. That doesn't automatically make him wrong on any particular debating point, but it does predispose many residents to view his claims with a jaundiced eye. Then again, residents should have expected fireworks when they voted for him," unquote. It was in the following year, in 2008, that Wilder decided to retire from public service by announcing he would not run for a second term. Shown here is another great editorial cartoon by Gary Brookins. Wilder's announcement was carried in newspapers across the country. The Washington Post praised him for a political career that broke racial barriers. The newspaper's editorial also stated the following, quote, "His decision marks the end of one of the most remarkable careers in American politics in any era, and a farewell from center stage for an outsized, prodigiously gifted public servant," unquote. Even though the mayor's approval rating had dropped following the attempted eviction of the school board, he did receive high marks for delivering results. A city council-sponsored poll at the time showed that 81% of citizens believed that Richmond was headed in the right direction. Wilder said that he focused on results rather than personality. He told the Virginian Pilot newspaper the following: "I've done everything I could do. The people didn't like my style, but they liked the direction the city was heading. I wouldn't expect people to emulate my style. You're not going to get things done by sitting around singing Kumbaya," unquote. So even with Wilder's retirement from office, there were still important issues that remained with regard to the city charter. Who had the authority to rent office space in City Hall, such as the City Council had done by renting to the school board? Another issue involved who had authority to hire and fire city employees. To settle those lawsuits that the City Council had brought against him, Wilder planned to take the cases to the Virginia Supreme Court. Regarding the City Council renting out office space, he wrote in an editorial, quote, "When the City Council decided to bypass the executive and to negotiate contracts on its own, and then to direct the mayor to execute them, it prepared a recipe for chaos," unquote. He added, quote, "The charter places administration in the hands of the mayor. When the council tries to take over the day-to-day administration of the city by passing ordinances controlling the minutiae of administration, the letter as well as the spirit of the charter has been violated," unquote. Wilder said that the wording of the city charter gave City Council the authority only for the offices of the city clerk, the city auditor, and the city attorney. So there were two lawsuits against the mayor, renting office space at the City Hall and the hiring and firing authority. So the question could be asked, why not go back to the Virginia General Assembly and ask them to straighten out the charter-related issues that had led to the two lawsuits against the mayor in the first place? The answer is that the General Assembly does not involve itself in charter issues that are tied up in litigation. Legislators do not want to sponsor any charter legislation that involves controversy. Instead, they want to sponsor legislation where there is a strong agreement among all of the parties involved. So, because the General Assembly was essentially off limits, Wilder planned to take those cases to the Virginia Supreme Court. However, there was not enough time. Wilder's term as mayor was coming to an end. Time had run out. Even though the Virginia Supreme Court had agreed to hear those cases, the new incoming mayor, Dwight Jones, went ahead and dropped those appeals to the Supreme Court soon after taking office in 2009. Once those appeals were dropped, however, the question still remained as to who had the authority. Was it the strong mayor or was it the city council? Those questions involving authority remain unanswered to this day. As I mentioned earlier, when the city of Richmond changed over to the strong mayor form of government, it was described by some observers as a political experiment in progress. Now, nearly 20 years later, those questions still remain as to who holds the authority. The bottom line is that the work required to resolve those issues remained unfinished. Thank you. So I think we have time to take some questions. And if anybody has a question, just raise your hand and Graham or...
Hey there. My name's Kim Bridges. I was actually an elected school board member during Wilder's last 2 years of his term. Hey, Linwood. And so you might suspect that I have some thoughts about living under that time period and being part of that eviction and going to court at midnight and all of that. But I'm really curious whether the book addresses it or whether you think about this beyond the book, because I do quite a bit. Some of the ripple effects of Wilder's relationship with the school board. I used to say he put the bully in bully pulpit when it came to the school board and RPS administration. And two of those ripple effects, I'm curious about your thoughts, are one was that, the superintendent that he essentially drove out, Deborah Jewel Sherman, went on to a really successful career at Harvard where she taught this case. And it's a very different presentation than the one you did. And so there are literally thousands of ed leaders like myself today who have learned a lot about overreach of mayoral control through her second career. And so I'm curious if you have thoughts about that, as well as the fact that during his term, there was a tremendous pushback to his efforts to get the business community to persuade the Richmond city not to elect its school board anymore. Tremendous pushback. And I think today we still see a lot of that public opinion in favor of elected boards, even when they may be less than we desire, particularly here in the city. So curious about your thoughts on those long-term ripple effects.
Well, you packed it in there in that question. There were, at the time, there were a number of mayors that were taking interest in their school system. Adrian Fenty, Washington, D.C., and his appointment of Michelle Rhee, and setting her up in a structure that basically took their equivalent of the school board and just diminished its power altogether. You have to remember that Wilder was a dollars and cents kind of guy, and he also wanted to see education help people succeed. And excessive amounts of money were being spent for the school system, and the graduation rates were low. So I can understand his position. In fact, let's do this. Anybody agree with me? Raise your hand. So, but it's good to see you, Kim, and I appreciate your question.
Do you have any insight into why Dwight Jones decided to drop those cases?
He ran for office with a pledge, among other pledges, to mollify, to take the anger out of the situation. He ran to, of course, he was a former school board member, but he ran on a promise to restore collegiality in the relationship between the school board and the city council. So I can't speak for him, and I've met him a couple of times, but I think that his promise to restore relations with the school board may have affected his decision to let those cases drop.
Hi, Linwood. I'm John Porch, a personal friend.
Hey, John.
How difficult did you find the job as press secretary during all these controversial issues, and how did you handle them?
Well, he was a delight to work with, and fasten your seatbelt and get ready. But I really do think that he tried in the time that he had to bring some corrective actions to the city of Richmond, both in terms of its operation as well as its relationships with the school board. But I guess, working for Doug Wilder was the highlight of my career, my journalism career. So it was a great time, frankly. It was time consuming. You work day and night, but that was part of the thrill of it.
Hi there. Curious, when you look at the current mayoral situation in Richmond or just recently, what are some of the parallels that you draw based on your experience with Mayor Wilder?
Well, you know, I really haven't studied the city council race enough to draw any parallels. What little I've read about it, I haven't read too much about the mayoral candidates being combative with the school system. Maybe I've missed something, but you know, it wasn't until too long ago that I realized that Paul Goldman was running for council. So I really hadn't followed the Richmonds. I get the Times Dispatch, and you know, I read it a little bit, but I hadn't followed the current politics to be able to make a comparison like that.
Hi,
Hi.
Joyce Han. My question has to do with your experience in the corporate environment, the nonprofit world, as well as the public sector. It seems to me when I consider Doug Wilder at times, he might have been much better suited to the corporate environment, which tends to be more dictatorial. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I don't have any thoughts on that. Thanks for the question, though.
Hello, my name's John Bridges, better known as Kim's husband. So living through those years, it was quite unique to hear Kim's perspective on things, and I really appreciate your comments and a gentleman like Governor Wilder who had towering strengths, but what some of the downsides of those are. And in my view, it was sometimes you just couldn't take the win, even though he had prevailed in his political adversaries. One issue that comes to mind, I'm interested in your perspective if this fits that, is the Slavery Museum, which I kind of blame Mayor Wilder for us not having one with the Fredericksburg property, and curious your perspective on that and what happened with that particular issue.
I never thought about it too deeply. It was frankly a matter of, you know, there weren't adequate funds to sustain the effort. So now I have read what little bit you know, there are efforts with the burial ground where that billboard is to, you know, bring some dignity to that situation. And I think that I had read somewhere there's talk of a slavery museum somewhere else in Richmond. So I hope there will be one day. But with regards to his efforts to try to establish one, you know, it just didn't work.
Do you think Wilder's term as mayor, whatever your view on its tumult and results, had a chilling effect on other Virginia city councils adopting a strong mayor form of government?
I don't know. But Richmond was the only one willing to take the chance to, you know, establish the strong mayor. And of course, Wilder propelled that. It's a big step. And, you know, changes have to be done to the city charter. And if it's not done, you know, they're all, as Harry Black was, and I were talking recently, they're always latent, unforeseen, unintended consequences to switching over to a different form of local government. So perhaps other localities have seen the situation in Richmond and thought, you know, let's just stay away from it.
Hi, my name is Denise. I have a question because Doug Wilder, he did a lot with the ballpark the Richmond Braves. One of the things that he wanted to do, I think they were called the Richmond Braves at the time, they're now the Squirrels. But one of the things he had done was he wanted to build a stadium down in the bottom, which basically would have been a wonderful area to do a slave museum. I don't know if it's really a question, but was there any talk or discussion about that? Because we could have used these financing for the slave museum versus, he was big in auditing money. And I think that one of the things I noticed was, I think he had pet projects and he seemed to be using tax dollars for these pet projects versus what might have been a help to the city.
So the question was,
Okay. Sorry, I know I'm jumping around here, but as a person that lived in the city of Richmond, he was big on auditing the school board, auditing the money, auditing the finances. But then he was heavily involved in trying to get a stadium down in the bottom versus looking, I guess it's looking at other ways that he could use taxpayer dollars to improve the city. He's looking at a personal, I guess, a business prospect, like the woman said, corporate America, he might have been better at than some of the things he was doing. I just see a conflict in what he was doing. And I don't know if you saw a conflict in some of his projects.
well, what I saw with regard to the ballpark was you have one consultant group here and they say build it in the bottom. Then you got another consultant coming in a few years later and they're like, keep it at its present site. And don't forget that at one point, Wilder wanted the new ballpark to be in the Fulton Bottom area. So it just seemed like a yo-yo effect with regard to, how many years has it taken for things to be now where they are? From, we've still had the diamond, and finally there's movement. So I guess it just depends on which consultant you talk to.
Today is November 14, 2024. Have the school board or the city schools improved since he left office?
Kim?
2 years after he left office, every school in the city was accredited for the first and still only time.
Thank you.
So Governor Wilder was clearly one of the most successful politicians that we've had in the United States. When you think about him being the grandson of slaves and to have had 70 plus years of public service. I know in your book, in your talk today, you focus a lot on the school board, but I wonder if you could share with those who may have not had an opportunity to read a number of the things, meeting the Queen, the eulogy with the Bears, the Maymont situation. I mean, his connection with people. If you could share a little bit more about some of the areas that perhaps you didn't focus on here in the talk.
Yeah, the thing about Wilder is that even his adversaries admired him. And they may disagree philosophically but there was a piece of the book where I described a situation. It was a reception one night somewhere. And there were some council members at the reception. And of course, the mayor and I were there. And I won't name the city council member, but he was trying to make it through the groups of people to get to the mayor. But the mayor saw him and he kept circling around. So they never did meet that night, but I thought it was interesting. Wilder has a personality that is very thrilling. People love him, and even people that don't love him like him. So, but like, for example, the Queen, that was an interesting situation. because I guess he knew he shouldn't have touched her. It was a gracious touch, though, you know, the back of the elbow. The Maymont Bears was an interesting situation because if there had been just a few more hours, a decision might have been made that would not have resulted in the death of the Bears. Those were not, you know, those instances were not meaty. They were more the frivolous things in terms of, you know, running the government. But everybody loved Wilder, I thought, even if they were philosophically opposed to him.
You mentioned Paul Goldman once. First time I ever met him, he was at an event trying to get signatures on a petition for the referendum to call for a strong mayor. And he seems to be a real spark plug. I'm surprised he didn't win a seat on city council now, but how did you interact with him?
Well, boy, that you put me on the spot. Have you read the book? Okay. I kept my distance from Paul. He was a very unique person, but I kept my distance from him. And of course, he ultimately left city government. And, you know, that was that.
Okay, I think that's all we have time for in terms of questions.
Okay, well,
So
thank
let's
you
give
all very
Linwood another
much.
round of applause. Linwood's going to be in Commonwealth Hall signing copies of his book. And if you have any other questions you'd like to ask, he'll be out there as well. So thank you so much
Yeah,
for your
thank you.
support.